London, December 1847. Snow tapped against the frosted windows of the park's townhouse, matching the rhythm of Michelle's trembling hands as she stared at the marriage contract before her. Candlelight flickered across the parchment, illuminating the elegant script that would bind her to a stranger, a duke she had never truly met, in a world that had already decided she was nothing more than a beautiful face. Do you understand the terms, Miss Parks? Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We did love to hear from you. If you enjoy Victorian-era tale stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. The solicitor's voice cut through the suffocating silence of her father's study. Michelle Parks lifted her head, golden curls catching the firelight, her hazel eyes reflecting both fear and fragile determination. At 21, she had once imagined love, stolen glances across ballrooms, whispered promises beneath moonlight, a marriage built on more than appearance. Now she saw only survival. I do, Mr. Holloway. Her voice remained steady despite the chaos within. The agreement is clear. Across the mahogany desk, her father, Thomas Parks, sat hunched and hollow-eyed, a man stripped of pride and power. Once respected, he had gambled away their standing with poor investments and poor judgment. The whispered scandals had followed, accusations of impropriety, rumors that Michelle herself had invited scandal through her beauty alone. None of it was true. All of it had destroyed them. Michelle, he began, his voice cracking beneath shame. If there were any other way, there isn't. Her words came sharper than intended. Softening slightly, she added, I've made my choice, Father. The truth hung unspoken between them. There was no choice. Not when creditors circled like winter wolves. Not when her mother wept behind closed doors and her younger brother faced a future without education or prospects. Not when the Parks name, once respectable, now ruined, teetered on the edge of oblivion. And not when society had already decided Michelle's beauty was both her only asset and her greatest crime. The door to the study opened without warning, and Michelle felt the air grow colder before she even turned. Harry Rodriguez, the Duke of Winterset, entered with the measured stride of a man who had long ago learned to command through presence alone. Tall and striking in his midnight blue coat, he surveyed the room with detached precision. At 32, his face held the sharp, aristocratic features of old nobility. High cheekbones, a firm jaw, winter blue eyes that revealed nothing. Handsome, yes, but carved from ice. Your Grace, the solicitor stammered, rising hastily. The Duke acknowledged him with the barest nod before his gaze settled on Michelle. His eyes, cold as a January dawn, assessed her without warmth, without curiosity. Only calculation. Miss Parks. His voice was deep, controlled, and utterly devoid of emotion. I trust the arrangements meet with your approval. Michelle rose slowly, refusing to cower before the man who would own her future. If she could not be his equal in society's eyes, she would at least stand before him as one. They do, Your Grace. Excellent. He approached the desk, removing his black leather gloves with deliberate precision. Then let us conclude this business. Business. That was all this was to him, a transaction. The acquisition of a bride whose beauty would restore his tarnished public image after the scandal with his former fiancée. In exchange, the Parks family would receive enough funds to bury their debts and salvage what remained of their dignity. The Duke took the pen offered by the solicitor and signed his name with a flourish, bold, decisive, final. When he extended the pen toward Michelle, their fingers brushed. A spark, brief, electric, unsettling. His eyes flickered, just for a heartbeat, before the cold mask returned. Michelle took the pen, her hand steady now, and signed her name beside his. Michelle Catherine Parks. soon to be the Duchess of Winterset. The solicitor blotted the ink, rolled the contract, and announced with false cheer, "The union is formalized. Congratulations to you both." Neither of them smiled. Harry Rodriguez turned to Michelle, his expression unreadable. "The carriage is waiting. We leave for Winterset Hall within the hour." "An hour?" Michelle's voice faltered. "Is that a problem, Miss Parks?" "No, Your Grace." "Good." He replaced his gloves, each motion precise and controlled. "You will find life at Winterset Hall orderly. I expect you to adapt accordingly." With that, he turned and strode from the room, leaving Michelle alone with her father and the dying fire. Thomas Parks reached for her hand, his grip weak and trembling. "Michelle, I am so—" "Don't, father." She pulled her hand away gently, her voice soft but firm. "It is done." As she climbed the stairs to pack the few belongings she would take with her, Michelle paused at the window overlooking the snow-covered street. Below, the Duke's gleaming black carriage waited, polished and imposing, flanked by footmen in crimson livery. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. What have I become? A bride without love. A duchess by desperation, a woman sold for her beauty to a man who had no intention of ever truly seeing her. But as Michelle turned from the window, her reflection caught in the candlelight. Golden hair, determined eyes, a spine that refused to break. She made herself a silent promise. If beauty is all he sees, then let him look closely. He may discover I am far more than he bargained for. An hour later, Michelle Parks stepped into the Duke of Winterset's carriage, her heart pounding as the door closed behind her. The Duke sat across from her, his gaze fixed on the winter streets beyond the window. He did not look at her once during the entire journey, and so began the marriage that society would envy, whisper about, and eventually witness transform, not through affection, but through a single, shocking kiss that would redeem them both. The journey to Winterset Hall took 3 hours through winter darkness. Michelle spent every minute wondering what kind of prison she had just entered and whether the Duke's cold indifference would ever thaw. She would have her answer soon enough. But first, she had to survive her introduction to a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. The carriage wheels crunched to a halt on frozen gravel, and Michelle's breath caught as she glimpsed Winterset Hall through the frosted window. It rose from the snow-covered landscape like something carved from winter itself. All stone towers and arched windows, elegant but forbidding. Candlelight glowed from within, warm yet unreachable, like promises made but never kept. "We have arrived." The Duke's voice startled her. He had remained silent the entire journey. Before Michelle could respond, the carriage door swung open. A footman in crimson livery extended his hand, and she stepped out into the biting December wind. Snow swirled around her cloak as she ascended the marble steps, acutely aware of the Duke following behind. Close enough to be proper, distant enough to make his disinterest clear. The grand entrance hall stole what remained of her composure. Twin staircases swept upward like frozen waterfalls, their banisters draped with evergreen and silver ribbon. Chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, their crystals catching candlelight and scattering it across walls lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Everything gleamed, polished, perfect, cold, and watching from the shadows stood the household staff. Michelle felt their eyes immediately. A dozen servants stood in formal attendance, their expressions carefully neutral, but their gazes followed her every movement. She caught fragments of what they saw reflected in those stares. Awe at her beauty, yes, but something else too. Suspicion, judgment, perhaps even pity. "Mrs. Henshaw." The Duke's voice echoed through the hall. "This is the new Duchess of Winterset. See that her chambers are prepared." An elderly woman in black stepped forward, her face lined but sharp-eyed. "Of course, Your Grace. Welcome to Winterset Hall, Your Grace." The title sounded strange directed at Michelle. too grand, too heavy. "Thank you," Michelle managed, her voice smaller than intended. The Duke removed his gloves with that same precise deliberation. "Mrs. Henshaw will show you to your rooms. We will speak tomorrow regarding household arrangements." "Tomorrow?" Michelle turned to him. "I thought, it has been a long day, Miss Parks." He caught himself. "Forgive me. Duchess, I assumed you would prefer to rest." It wasn't a question, it was a dismissal. "Of course," Michelle replied, her spine stiffening. "How considerate." Something flickered in his winter blue eyes. Amusement, annoyance, before the mask returned. "Mrs. Henshaw." The housekeeper gestured toward the left staircase. "This way, Your Grace." As Michelle climbed the stairs, she felt the weight of every watching eye. Behind her, the Duke's footsteps echoed in the opposite direction, toward the east wing, she would later learn, as far from her chambers as the house allowed. Her rooms were beautiful in the way museums are beautiful, meant to be admired, not lived in. The bedchamber stretched vast and cold, dominated by a four-poster bed draped in silver silk. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, but its warmth barely reached the center of the room. "Will there be anything else, Your Grace?" Mrs. Henshaw asked, her tone professionally polite but somehow empty. "No, thank you." The housekeeper hesitated at the door. "His Grace keeps particular hours. You will find breakfast laid in the morning room at 8. The Duke takes his in his study. Separate chambers, separate meals, separate lives." "I understand." After Mrs. Henshaw departed, Michelle sank onto the edge of the bed, her composure finally cracking. The silence of Winterset Hall pressed against her like physical weight, heavy, suffocating, absolute. She had expected coldness from the Duke. She had not expected to feel like a ghost haunting her own life. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Yes, a young maid entered, carrying fresh linens. She was perhaps 16, with auburn hair and nervous hands. "Begging your pardon, Your Grace. I'm Rose. I'll be attending to your chambers." "Thank you, Rose." The girl worked quickly, efficiently, but Michelle noticed the sidelong glances, the same mixture of awe and something else she'd seen downstairs. "Rose," Michelle ventured, "have you served at Winterset Hall long?" 3 years, Your Grace." "Then you must know the house well." Rose's hands stilled on the linens. "Well enough, Your Grace." "And the Duke?" The maid's expression shuttered immediately. "His Grace is a fair master, Your Grace. Most exacting in his standards, but fair." Exacting, cold, controlled. Michelle was beginning to understand what fair meant in this house. "Rose, may I ask?" Michelle hesitated, then pressed forward. "Was there, before me, was there someone else?" The girl's face went pale. "Your Grace, I shouldn't, please." Rose glanced toward the door, then whispered quickly, "Lady Clarissa Montrose, Your Grace. She was... They were to be married 2 years ago, but then..." She caught herself. "Forgive me. I've said too much." "What happened?" "It's not my place, Your Grace." Before Michelle could press further, voices drifted up from the corridor outside. Servants' voices, low but distinct. Chose her for her beauty, nothing more. A replacement ornament, that's all. Poor thing doesn't know what she's walked into. Rose's eyes widened in horror. "Your Grace, they didn't mean..." "It's all right, Rose." Michelle's voice came out steadier than she felt. "You may go." After the girl fled, Michelle moved to the window. Below, the snow-covered grounds of Winterset Hall stretched into darkness, beautiful, vast, and utterly empty. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, just as she had done in her father's house. A replacement ornament. Is that truly all she was? A beautiful face to cover the Duke's old wounds, a piece of decoration to fill the space left by Lady Clarissa Montrose. Whoever she had been, whatever she had done to leave such shadows in this frozen house. Michelle's reflection stared back at her from the window. Golden hair, determined eyes, a woman trying desperately not to break. "If I am merely an ornament," she whispered to her reflection, "then I will be the one ornament he cannot ignore." But as the clock struck midnight and the house settled into its cold, watchful silence, Michelle couldn't shake the feeling that Winterset Hall itself was waiting, watching to see if she would survive what was coming. And somewhere in the East Wing, behind closed doors, the Duke of Winterset sat alone in his study, staring at a portrait he had turned to face the wall. A portrait of a woman with dark hair and darker eyes. A woman named Clarissa. The Ashford soiree glittered like a carefully constructed trap. Michelle stood at the entrance to the grand ballroom, her hand resting lightly on the Duke's arm, and felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes turned toward her in perfect unison. The orchestra faltered for half a beat. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the candles seemed to flicker in acknowledgement. She had dressed carefully, a gown of ivory silk with gold embroidery that caught the light with every breath, her golden curls swept up to expose the graceful line of her throat. She looked, she knew, exactly like what they expected, a beautiful ornament on the Duke of Winterset's arm. "Steady," Harry murmured beside her, his voice so low only she could hear. It was the first word he'd spoken to her all evening beyond formal pleasantries. "I am perfectly steady, Your Grace," she replied, matching his tone. His fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on her gloved hand. Then they descended the steps into the waiting crowd. The first strike came from Lady Pemberton, a sharp-featured woman in burgundy silk who positioned herself directly in their path. "Duke Winterset, how delightful to see you." Her eyes raked over Michelle with surgical precision. "And this must be your new bride. My dear, what an absolutely stunning gown. One can hardly look at anything else." The emphasis on anything landed like a slap. "You're too kind, Lady Pemberton," Michelle replied smoothly, refusing to flinch. "Kind? Oh, no, my dear. Simply observant." Lady Pemberton's smile sharpened. "Beauty is such a remarkable gift, is it not? Particularly when one has little else to recommend them." Harry's jaw tightened, but Michelle spoke before he could intervene. "Indeed, though I've always found substance far more enduring than surface. Don't you agree?" Lady Pemberton's eyes flashed, but she merely laughed, a brittle, cutting sound. How charmingly quaint. As they moved deeper into the ballroom, the whispers followed like smoke. "Married her for her beauty, obviously. Can you imagine? That face is literally all she has. Poor Duke, settling for a pretty ornament after Clarissa." Michelle kept her spine straight, her expression serene, even as each word struck like small, sharp objects. Men watched her with undisguised fascination, some appreciative, others calculating, all of them reducing her to something to be assessed and acquired. The women were worse. Their sneers hid behind fans and forced smiles, but their eyes promised cruelty. "Your Grace." A young lord, Viscount something, materialized beside her with wine. "You are by far the most radiant woman here this evening." "How kind," Michelle murmured, not taking the glass. "I confess, the Duke is extraordinarily fortunate to possess such beauty." "My wife," Harry interrupted, his voice cutting through the Viscount's fawning with icy precision, "is not a possession to be admired, Hartley. She's a duchess to be respected." The Viscount paled and retreated hastily. Michelle glanced at Harry, surprised, but his expression remained unreadable. That same cold mask he wore like armor. They circulated through the room in careful silence, Harry introducing her to various lords and ladies with formal detachment. Michelle smiled, nodded, spoke when required. But beneath her composure, something inside her was cracking. Each whisper, each dismissive glance, each reference to her beauty as though it were her only attribute. They accumulated like weights pressing against her chest. "You are more than this," she told herself. "You are more than what they see." But what if Harry saw her the same way? What if to him she truly was nothing more than a replacement ornament? Then the crowd parted near the terrace doors, and Michelle felt the air change. A woman stood framed against the winter night, tall, elegant, devastatingly beautiful in deep emerald silk. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate style, her pale skin luminous against the green fabric. But it was her eyes that captured attention, dark, intelligent, and cold as midwinter ice. She surveyed the ballroom with the confidence of someone who knew she commanded it. When her gaze landed on Michelle, she smiled. It was the smile of a predator spotting prey. "Clarissa," Harry breathed beside her, so quietly Michelle almost didn't hear. Lady Clarissa Montrose began moving through the crowd toward them, each step deliberate and graceful. Conversation ceased in her wake. Even the orchestra seemed to quiet. She stopped precisely 3 feet away, close enough to be intimate, distant enough to maintain propriety. "Harry," her voice was silk and toxic, "how wonderful to see you looking so content." "Lady Clarissa?" Harry's tone could have frozen fire. Those dark eyes shifted to Michelle, appraising her with the thoroughness of someone evaluating merchandise. "And this must be the new Duchess of Winterset." She tilted her head. "My dear, you are every bit as exquisite as the rumors suggested, like a perfect porcelain doll." Michelle felt the insult beneath the compliment, but kept her voice steady. "Lady Clarissa, how kind of you to say." "Kind? No, merely honest." Clarissa's smile never reached her eyes. Harry always did have such refined taste in decorative objects. The room had gone silent now, every guest openly watching the encounter. Harry stepped forward slightly, placing himself between them. "Clarissa, oh, don't trouble yourself, darling." She looked past him to Michelle. "I'm certain the new Duchess and I will become quite acquainted. After all, we have so much in common now." With that, she turned and glided away, leaving a wake of whispers and shocked gasps. Michelle stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Ignore her," Harry said quietly, his hand finding the small of her back, the first genuinely protective gesture he'd made. "Clarissa thrives on creating spectacles." "Is that what she did to you?" Michelle asked before she could stop herself. "Created a spectacle?" His hand stiffened against her back. "That is not a discussion for a ballroom." "Then when—" "Not now, Michelle." He had never used her given name before. She looked up at him and found something unexpected in his winter blue eyes. Not anger, but something raw and carefully hidden. Pain, perhaps, or regret. Before she could respond, he stepped away. "If you'll excuse me, I see Lord Ashford. Remain here. I'll return shortly." And then he was gone, leaving Michelle alone in a room full of enemies. She stood perfectly still, her composure intact despite the storm inside her. Decorative object, porcelain doll, replacement ornament. Around her, the whispers rose like a tide. "Did you see Clarissa's face? Poor thing doesn't stand a chance. He'll never truly love her, not after Clarissa." Michelle lifted her chin, met the stares with steady eyes, and smiled. If they thought beauty was all she had, then let them underestimate her. She would prove them all wrong, starting with the Duke himself. Michelle found the truth 3 days after the Ashford soiree, hidden in the library at Winterset Hall. She had retreated there, seeking solace among the leather-bound volumes that lined the walls floor to ceiling. The fire crackled softly, and winter light filtered through tall windows, casting everything in shades of grey and gold. She had just pulled a volume of poetry from the shelf when a folded newspaper slipped from between the pages and fell to the floor. The London Chronicle, May 1845. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The headline struck like a physical blow. Duke of Winterset jilted at altar. Lady Clarissa Montrose flees with another. Michelle sank into the nearest chair, her eyes racing across the print. The wedding guests waited in stunned silence as word spread that the bride had vanished. Lady Clarissa Montrose discovered to have been conducting a clandestine affair with Lord Edmund Graves. The Duke, humiliated before all of London society, withdrew immediately to his estate. Sources suggest Lady Clarissa claimed the Duke was too cold, too controlled, incapable of true affection. Michelle's chest tightened. She imagined Harry, proud, controlled Harry, standing at an altar, waiting for a bride who never came. The whispers, the pitying stares, the scandal that must have consumed him. No wonder he had built wall. No wonder he kept everyone at arm's length. No wonder he saw their marriage as nothing more than a transaction, safer to purchase a wife than risk trusting one. I thought I removed all of those. Michelle gasped and spun around. Harry stood in the doorway, still in his riding coat, snow dusting his shoulders. His expression was unreadable, but something sharp flickered in his eyes. Your Grace, She stood quickly, the newspaper falling from her lap. I didn't mean to pry. It simply fell from the poetry collection. His voice was flat. How convenient. I swear to you I wasn't searching. It doesn't matter. He crossed the room and retrieved the paper, his movements rigid and controlled. You would have heard the story eventually. Society delights in reminding me of it. Michelle watched him stare at the headline, his jaw tight. For a moment, she glimpsed the man beneath the ice, wounded, wary, determined never to be vulnerable again. She was wrong, Michelle said quietly. His eyes snapped to hers. Excuse me? Lady Clarissa, she was wrong about you. You know nothing about me. I know you defended me at the soiree when you didn't have to. I know you keep your word even when it costs you comfort. She took a tentative step forward. And I know that being controlled isn't the same as being incapable of feeling. Sometimes it simply means you've been hurt enough to guard what remains. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. For 3 heartbeats, they stood in silence, the fire crackling between them. Then the mask returned. Your sympathy is unnecessary, Duchess. He tossed the newspaper into the fire, where it curled and blackened. What happened with Clarissa was 2 years ago. I've moved beyond it. Have you? The question hung in the air, dangerous and honest. Harry's eyes hardened. This conversation is over. He turned to leave, but Michelle's voice stopped him. I'm not her, you know. He paused at the doorway, his back to her. I never said you were. You treat me as though I might be, as though at any moment I might betray you or humiliate you, or prove to be something other than what I appear. Isn't that what beauty often conceals? He glanced back at her, his expression carefully neutral. A pretty surface hiding ugly truths? The words struck deeper than he probably intended. Perhaps, Michelle replied, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. Or perhaps sometimes beauty is simply beauty. Neither a weapon nor a deception. Just something that exists alongside everything else a person is. For a moment, just a moment, she thought she saw his facade crack. But then he straightened his shoulders and left without another word. Michelle stood alone in the library, staring at the flames consuming the newspaper. She understood him now, and understanding made everything more complicated. That evening, Michelle sat at her dressing table while Rose brushed out her hair. The maid chattered about the upcoming winter assembly, but Michelle barely heard her. Her mind kept returning to Harry's wounded eyes, to Clarissa's predatory smile, to the impossible task of being married to a man who had vowed never to trust again. Your Grace, are you well? Rose's concerned voice broke through her thoughts. You seem troubled. I'm fine, Rose. Just tired. Perhaps you should rest before dinner. His Grace likely won't. Rose stopped abruptly. Won't what? Won't join you, Your Grace. He usually takes his meals in his study. Of course he does. After Rose left, Michelle did something she had promised herself she wouldn't do. She allowed the tears to come. Silent, burning tears that tracked down her cheeks as she stared at her reflection, at the beautiful face that had brought her nothing but isolation and judgment. I'm so tired of being seen, but never known. The door opened without warning. Michelle spun around, hastily wiping her eyes, but it was too late. Harry stood frozen in the doorway, clearly intending to deliver some message. His eyes widened slightly as he registered her tear-stained face. Forgive me, he said quickly. I should have knocked. It's nothing. Michelle turned away, her voice tight. What did you need, Your Grace? Silence stretched between them, then quietly, Are you crying? No. Michelle, I said I'm fine. She kept her back to him, refusing to let him see her break. Please, just whatever you came to say it and go. More silence. She expected him to leave. He always left. Instead, she heard him step further into the room and close the door. I came to inform you, he said slowly, that I've arranged for additional staff to accompany you to social functions. Trusted staff who will ensure you're protected from undue gossip. Michelle's breath caught. Why? Because you are my wife. And while I may not be able to give you affection, I can at least ensure you're not torn apart by society's vultures. She turned to face him, tears still glistening on her cheeks. You don't owe me protection, Your Grace. Our arrangement requires only appearances. Nevertheless, his eyes held hers, winter blue, guarded, but no longer entirely cold. You've conducted yourself with remarkable grace under circumstances that would have broken most women. That deserves acknowledgement. You're saying I'm not entirely useless ornament. A ghost of something, was it amusement, flickered across his face. I'm saying you're more resilient than I anticipated. It wasn't affection, it wasn't warmth, but it was something. Michelle managed a small, watery smile. Well, that's progress, I suppose. Harry's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Then he seemed to catch himself and cleared his throat. Good evening, Duchess. Good evening, Your Grace. After he left, Michelle returned to the mirror. Her reflection showed red eyes and tear-stained cheeks, but also something new. Hope. Perhaps the Duke of Winterset's walls weren't as impenetrable as he believed, and perhaps beauty wasn't the only thing she had to offer after all. Lady Clarissa Montrose arrived at Winterset Hall on a grey December afternoon, uninvited and unapologetic. Michelle was in the morning room reviewing seating arrangements for the upcoming Christmas ball when Mrs. Henshaw appeared, her expression pinched with disapproval. Your Grace, Lady Clarissa Montrose is here. She insists on seeing you. Michelle's pen stilled above the parchment. Did she request an appointment? No, Your Grace. She simply arrived. Of course she did. Michelle set down her pen carefully, smoothing her skirts. Show her in. Clarissa swept into the room like winter itself, all elegance and cold beauty in a gown of deep plum velvet. Her dark eyes assessed the space with proprietary familiarity, as though she still belonged there. Michelle. May I call you Michelle? She didn't wait for permission. How absolutely charming you've made this room, though I do miss the blue drapes that used to hang here. They suited the light so much better. The message was clear. This was my house first. Lady Clarissa. Michelle rose, refusing to be intimidated in her own home. What an unexpected pleasure. Oh, dispense with the formalities, darling. We're practically sisters, aren't we? Both of us having occupied the same position. Clarissa's smile was razor-sharp. Though I suppose I never actually made it to the altar. You must feel quite fortunate. I feel many things. Fortunate is certainly among them. Clarissa circled the room, her fingers trailing over furniture, adjusting a vase of winter roses with casual presumption. I heard about your rather spectacular debut at the Ashford soiree. Society can be so cruel to newcomers, can't it? Especially those who arrive with nothing but beauty to recommend them. Is there something specific you wanted, Lady Clarissa? Direct, how refreshing. Clarissa turned, her expression shifting to something that might have passed for sympathy. Actually, I came to offer advice. Woman to woman. You see, I know Harry in ways you never will. I know his habits, his preferences, his expectations. Michelle's spine stiffened. I'm certain I can manage my own marriage. Can you? Clarissa moved closer, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper. Tell me, has he touched you yet? Truly touched you, or does he still maintain those careful walls, keeping you at arm's length like an exquisite decoration to be admired but never truly possessed? Heat flooded Michelle's cheeks. That is none of your concern. Oh, but it is. Clarissa's eyes glittered with malicious delight. Because I know why he married you, sweet Michelle. You're a beautiful bandage over a wound that never healed. A replacement for what he lost. And the moment he realizes you're not enough to fill that void, she shrugged delicately. Well, I've seen what happens when Harry's illusions shatter. Michelle forced herself to remain composed. If that's all, actually, there's one more thing. Clarissa reached into her reticule and withdrew a small bundle of letters tied with ribbon. I found these while sorting through some old correspondence. Love letters or what attempted to pass for them. Rather desperate, actually. I thought perhaps you'd misplaced them. She placed the bundle on the side table, her fingers lingering. Michelle's stomach twisted. I don't know what you're... Don't you? Clarissa's smile was pure poison. Perhaps you've forgotten writing to Harry before your marriage, begging him to consider you, professing your admiration, your desperation to become his duchess. She tilted her head. Or perhaps someone else wrote them in your name. Either way, they exist now, and society does so love a scandal. Michelle's blood ran cold. Those are forgeries. Are they? How fascinating that you knew without even looking. Clarissa moved toward the door, then paused. I do hope the Christmas ball is spectacular. I hear the guest list is quite extensive this year. So many eyes watching. So many tongues ready to wag. After she left, Michelle stood frozen, staring at the letters on the table. Her hands trembled as she picked them up, untying the ribbon with fumbling fingers. The handwriting was eerily similar to her own. Slightly slanted, carefully feminine. Each letter was dated before her marriage, filled with flowery professions of admiration and thinly veiled desperation. Your Grace, I write to you with the deepest hope that you might consider. I know I'm unworthy of your attention, but my circumstances are dire. My beauty is all I have to offer, but I would give it gladly. Michelle's hands shook so violently the papers scattered across the floor. This was what Clarissa planned. These letters would be revealed at the Christmas ball before all of society, making Michelle appear desperate, calculating, pathetic. Everything Harry feared, everything he had built walls to protect himself against. The door opened again. Harry entered, still in his riding coat, but stopped when he saw her face. What's wrong? Michelle quickly gathered the letters, clutching them against her chest. Nothing. Lady Clarissa paid a visit. His expression darkened immediately. Clarissa was here. She left already. What did she want? To destroy me, to reclaim you, to prove I'm exactly what you fear, a beautiful fraud. She merely wished to offer her congratulations on our marriage. The lie tasted bitter. Harry studied her with those penetrating winter blue eyes, clearly unconvinced. "Michelle, I should return to the ball preparations." She moved past him quickly, the letters still clutched in her hands. "Mrs. Henshaw needs my approval on the menu." "Michelle." His hand caught her arm gently. "If Clarissa threatened you—" "She didn't." Michelle met his gaze, forcing steadiness into her voice. She was perfectly civil. He didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes. But after a moment, he released her arm. "The Christmas ball," he said quietly, "has always been Winterset Hall's most prominent social event. Hundreds of guests, every notable family in London." "I understand." "Do you?" His expression was unreadable. "It will be far more scrutinizing than the Ashford soiree. Every move you make will be watched, analyzed, gossiped about. If you'd prefer to postpone—" "No." Michelle lifted her chin, surprising herself with her firmness. "I won't hide. Not from society, and not from Lady Clarissa." Something flickered in Harry's eyes. Approval? Concern? But he simply nodded. "Very well. But if anything happens, if anyone makes you uncomfortable, you tell me immediately." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why do you care?" His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he might actually answer honestly. Instead he straightened and stepped back. "Because you are my wife, and I protect what is mine." After he left, Michelle sank into a chair, the forged letters burning against her chest. The Christmas ball was 5 days away, 5 days until Clarissa's trap sprang shut. 5 days to decide whether to warn Harry and risk confirming every fear he harbored about trusting someone beautiful, or face the humiliation alone and the hope she could survive it. Through the window, she watched snow begin to fall across the grounds of Winterset Hall. Beautiful, cold, and treacherous. Just like the game Clarissa had set in motion, and Michelle had no idea how to win. Winterset Hall had been transformed into something from a winter fairy tale. Evergreen garlands draped every banister, woven through with silver ribbon and tiny glass ornaments that caught the light like captured stars. Hundreds of candles blazed in, crystal chandeliers, their glow reflecting off polished marble floors. The grand staircases, those twin waterfalls of stone, had been lined with white roses and winter jasmine, their petals dusted with what looked like fresh snow. Through the tall windows, real snow drifted down in lazy spirals, blanketing the grounds in pristine white. It was breathtaking. It was perfect. It was a glittering stage set for her destruction. Michelle stood at the top of the left staircase, her hand trembling on the balustrade. Her gown, golden silk that shimmered like candlelight, cut to perfection, designed to dazzle, suddenly felt like a costume. Below, 300 guests filled the ballroom, their faces turned upward in anticipation. "They're waiting to see if you'll fall." "Ready." Harry appeared beside her, immaculate in black evening dress, his expression carefully neutral. "No," Michelle whispered honestly. His hand found the small of her back. Steadying, protective. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." She had burned the forged letters 2 days ago, watching them curl and blacken in her chamber fire. She had said nothing to Harry. If Clarissa's trap was inevitable, Michelle would face it on her own terms, with dignity, with composure, with the grace she'd clung to like armor these past weeks, even if it shattered her. They descended together, and the crowd parted like a silk curtain. Gasps rippled through the ballroom, genuine awe at her appearance mixing with something darker. Anticipation, hunger for spectacle. Michelle smiled, nodded, played her part perfectly. For 1 hour, she danced and conversed and moved through society's glittering web. Harry remained close but distant, watchful in that controlled way of his. Everything seemed almost normal. Then she saw Clarissa. The woman stood near the terrace doors in a gown of crimson silk, dark hair piled high, surrounded by a cluster of society's most influential ladies. Lady Pemberton, the Countess of Hartwell, Mrs. Ashford, all of them holding small pieces of folded parchment, all of them reading. Michelle's heart stopped. The whispers began like wind through dead leaves, soft at first, then growing, spreading, consuming. Can you imagine? Wrote to him begging for marriage. Absolutely desperate. Nothing but her beauty to offer, she said so herself. Laughter, cruel, delighted laughter, rippled through clusters of guests. Michelle stood frozen as society's attention pivoted toward her. The music faltered. Conversations died. 300 pairs of eyes fixed on her with predatory focus. Lady Pemberton approached first, holding one of the letters delicately between gloved fingers, like something distasteful. Your Grace. Her voice dripped false sympathy. Such an enlightening discovery. I had no idea you were so desperately in love with the Duke before your marriage. She read aloud, My beauty is all I have to offer, but I would give it gladly. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. That's not... Michelle's voice came out strangled. I never... Oh, but it's in your hand, dear. The Countess of Hartwell joined the circle closing around Michelle, her own letter raised like evidence. Several letters, actually. All professing your admiration, your desperation to escape your family's ruin by any means necessary. The crowd pressed closer, a wall of silk and jewels and judgment. Did you really write to the Duke begging him to marry you? Is it true you offered yourself as nothing more than a beautiful ornament? How absolutely shameless. Please. Michelle's voice broke. She looked around frantically for Harry, but couldn't see him through the crush of bodies. Those letters are forgeries. I never... Forgeries. Clarissa's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She glided forward, her expression the perfect picture of wounded confusion. But darling, why would anyone forge love letters in your name? Unless... She paused dramatically. Unless you're ashamed of what you truly are, a desperate woman who used her beauty to trap a duke. The ballroom erupted in whispered scandal. Michelle felt the world tilting. Her carefully constructed composure cracked, then shattered. Tears burned behind her eyes, tears of rage, humiliation, helplessness. This is what they've always believed. This is what they've always seen. Nothing but beauty, nothing but surface. Nothing real. Where is the Duke? Someone called out. Let him confirm it. Yes. Make him tell us the truth. The crowd parted, and Michelle saw Harry standing at the edge of the ballroom, his face carved from stone. Their eyes met across the distance, hers pleading, his unreadable. Please, she thought desperately. Please don't believe them. Please don't think I'm her. I'm Clarissa. I'm everything you fear. Lady Pemberton raised her voice to carry across the room. Your Grace, these letters, did your wife truly pursue you so desperately before your marriage? The entire ballroom fell silent. 300 guests held their breath. Clarissa smiled, triumph glittering in her dark eyes. And Michelle stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, beautiful, humiliated, utterly alone, waiting for the man she had married to destroy her with his answer. The candles flickered. Snow drifted past the windows, and Harry Rodriguez, Duke of Winterset, began walking toward his wife. Harry walked through the silent ballroom like winter itself. Cold, inevitable, unstoppable. Every eye followed him. Every breath held. The crowd parted without being asked, creating a path straight to Michelle, who stood trembling in the center of the room, tears glistening on her cheeks, her golden gown catching the candlelight like a flame about to extinguish. He stopped directly in front of Lady Pemberton, his hand extended. The letters. Your Grace, I merely thought you should know. The letters. Now. Lady Pemberton handed them over with shaking fingers. Harry took the bundle, his jaw tight, and turned slowly to face the assembled crowd. 300 guests waited in breathless anticipation. Beside the terrace doors, Clarissa watched with barely concealed satisfaction. He unfolded the first letter. Silence pressed against the vaulted ceiling like physical weight. "Your Grace," Harry read aloud, his voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "I write to you with the deepest hope that you might consider my circumstances. My beauty is all I have to offer, but I would give it gladly." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Michelle's face drained of color. "He's going to condemn me," she thought, her world collapsing. "He's going to confirm their worst beliefs." Harry looked up from the letter, his winter blue eyes sweeping across the sea of watching faces. "You've all read these. You've all drawn your conclusions about my wife's character based on them." "Your Grace," Clarissa's voice rang out, dripping false sympathy. "Surely you cannot deny—" "I deny," Harry interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade, "that my wife wrote a single word of this pathetic fiction." Gasps erupted. Clarissa's face went pale. Harry held up the letters, his expression carved from ice and fury. "These are forgeries. Clumsy, transparent forgeries designed to humiliate the Duchess of Winterset before society." His gaze found Clarissa across the room. "Designed by someone who understands humiliation intimately." The crowd turned as one toward Clarissa, whose crimson gown suddenly seemed garish, whose beauty suddenly seemed sharp and cruel. "That's absurd," she stammered. "Why would I—" "Because you cannot bear," Harry said quietly, dangerously, "that I chose someone else." Then, before the entire assembly, he tore the letters apart. The sound of ripping parchment echoed through the ballroom like thunder. He let the pieces fall, scattering across the polished floor like snow. "My wife," he said, his voice dropping to something cold and absolute, "has no need to beg for anything, least of all me." He turned to Michelle, who stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Harry," she whispered, broken and disbelieving. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on hers, no longer winter cold, but burning with something fierce and protective. His hand rose slowly, gently, to cup her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "You think I don't see you," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "You think all I see is beauty. Isn't it?" Her voice cracked. "No." His other hand found her waist, pulling her closer. "I see resilience, intelligence, grace under cruelty that would have destroyed anyone else. I see a woman who has survived everything society and I have thrown at her and remained standing." Michelle's breath hitched. "Harry!" "Let them all see," he whispered, his lips a breath away from hers, "who you truly are." And then, in front of 300 gasping guests, beneath chandeliers blazing with candlelight, with snow drifting past the tall windows like witnesses, Harry Rodriguez, Duke of Winterset, kissed his wife. Not a polite kiss, not a formal kiss, a real kiss. Possessive, tender, undeniable. Michelle's hands clutched at his coat, her world spinning, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt his arms tighten around her, felt the careful walls he'd built crashing down between them, felt everything change in the space of a heartbeat. When he finally pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, his breath warm against her lips. The ballroom had erupted into chaos. Shocked gasps, delighted whispers, stunned silence from those who had expected her ruin. But Michelle heard none of it. All she heard was Harry's voice, rough and honest. "I should have done that weeks ago." She laughed, a broken, tearful sound. "Why didn't you?" "Because I was a fool." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his hands still framing her face. "I thought protecting myself meant keeping you at a distance. I was wrong." Across the ballroom, Clarissa stood white-faced and rigid, her trap shattered, her victory stolen. Lady Pemberton and the other gossips looked away in shame. The Countess of Hartwell clutched her pearls, scandalized, but slowly, hesitantly, someone began to applaud. Then another. Then the entire ballroom burst into applause. Some genuine, some obligatory, but all of it acknowledging what had just transpired. The Duke of Winterset had publicly, passionately claimed his wife. Harry ignored them all. His attention remained fixed on Michelle, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "Are you all right?" She nodded, tears still streaming, but now they were different tears. "I think so." "Good." He took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture both tender and defiant. "Then let's give them something else to talk about." He led her toward the center of the ballroom as the orchestra, reading the moment perfectly, struck up a waltz. And there, surrounded by watching eyes and falling snow and the glittering wreckage of Clarissa's schemes, the Duke and Duchess of Winterset danced. For the first time, they moved as one, not a cold arrangement, not a business transaction, but something real and fragile and worth fighting for. Michelle looked up at him, her voice barely audible over the music. "What happens now?" Harry's expression softened in a way she'd never seen. "Now, we stop pretending this marriage is anything less than what it's becoming." "And what is it becoming?" His hand tightened on her waist. "Something I didn't think I deserved, something I didn't think I could have." "What's that? Real?" As they turned beneath the chandeliers, Michelle caught a glimpse of Clarissa fleeing toward the terraced doors, her crimson gown trailing behind her like blood on snow. Lady Pemberton whispered, furiously, to the Countess. The other guests watched with newfound respect and fear, but none of it mattered anymore, because Harry was looking at her, truly looking at her, and for the first time since arriving at Winterset Hall, Michelle didn't feel like an ornament. She felt like a wife. His wife. And perhaps, just perhaps, something even more dangerous. Someone he was beginning to love. The guests departed Winterset Hall in waves of whispered speculation and barely concealed awe. Michelle stood at the top of the grand staircase, watching carriages roll away into the snowy night, their lanterns bobbing like distant stars. Her golden gown still shimmered in the candlelight, but she felt different inside it now. No longer a decoration, but a woman who had survived her own trial by fire. Behind her, servants moved through the ballroom collecting champagne glasses and scattered rose petals. The orchestra had long since packed away their instruments. The magical winter wonderland was being dismantled piece by piece, but something had been built in its place. "Your Grace." Michelle turned to find Lady Pemberton approaching hesitantly, her earlier cruelty replaced by something that looked almost like shame. "I wanted to apologize," the older woman said stiffly. "I should never have assumed, that is, I should have known better than to trust." She struggled with the words. "The Duke made his position quite clear. You have my respect. Not affection, not genuine warmth, but respect." It was a start. After Lady Pemberton left, others came. The Countess of Hartwell, Lord Ashford, even young Viscount Hartley, all offering carefully worded apologies or stiff congratulations. Society had witnessed the Duke's public claim, and now they bowed accordingly. Michelle accepted each gesture with grace, but inside she felt hollow. They respect me now only because he claimed me, not because of who I am, but because of what he made me in their eyes. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt incomplete. "You handled that well." Michelle startled. Harry stood in the shadows near the library door, still in his evening dress, his cravat loosened. How long had he been watching? "Did I have a choice?" she asked quietly. "There's always a choice." He stepped into the candlelight, his expression unreadable. "You could have crumbled. You could have fled. You could have demanded I send them all away." His eyes held hers. Instead, you stood there and accepted their apologies with more grace than they deserved. They only apologized because you— Michelle stopped, her voice catching. Because what? Because you defended me. She turned to face him fully. Why did you do that, Harry? You could have confirmed their suspicions. You could have let me be ruined. It would have been safer for you, easier, to simply step back and let society tear me apart. His jaw tightened. You think I would do that? I think you've spent 2 years protecting yourself from exactly this kind of situation. A beautiful woman, public scrutiny, the risk of humiliation. Michelle took a step toward him. So why did you risk it? Why did you defend me? Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. Finally, Harry spoke, his voice rough. Because you deserved better. Better than what? Than being treated like a transaction, than being reduced to your appearance, than being humiliated for the crime of existing in a world that only values you for how you look. He ran a hand through his hair, his careful composure cracking. I've watched you these past weeks. Watched you endure whispers and cruelty and isolation with dignity I couldn't manage after my own scandal. You've been stronger than I ever was. Michelle's breath caught. You were hurt. So were you. His eyes met hers, fierce and honest. Your father's debts, the gossip, being forced into a marriage with a man who treated you like a beautiful inconvenience. He stepped closer. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I never stopped to consider I might be hurting you. Harry, when I saw you standing there tonight, he continued, his voice dropping, tears in your eyes, the entire ballroom ready to devour you, I realized something. He reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers. I realized I couldn't protect myself from caring about you. Not anymore. Michelle's heart hammered. What are you saying? I'm saying those letters were forgeries, but if they hadn't been, if you had written to me, desperate and afraid, I would have been honored. His thumb traced circles on her palm. I'm saying beauty isn't a crime, Michelle. It's just something you are alongside everything else. Your intelligence, your resilience, your stubborn refusal to break, even when breaking would be easier. Tears pricked her eyes again, but these were different. Hopeful. I was so certain, she whispered, that you would always see me the way society does. A pretty face, a useful ornament. Nothing more. I know. His free hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. I gave you every reason to believe that. But I was wrong, Michelle. You're so much more than beauty. You're— He struggled with the words, vulnerability etched across his features. You're someone I'm beginning to need. The admission hung between them, raw, dangerous, real. Michelle's hand covered his where it rested against her cheek. I'm terrified. Of what? Of this. She gestured between them. Of hoping, of trusting that this isn't just another performance for society's benefit. It's not. Harry's voice was certain now, steady. What I did tonight, that kiss, that was the first honest thing I've done since we married. And what do we do now? The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Now, we stop pretending we're strangers, trapped in a convenient arrangement. He pulled her closer, his arms encircling her waist. Now, we try something terrifying. What's that? Being married, truly married. His forehead rested against hers. No more separate chambers, no more careful distance, no more walls. Michelle's breath shuddered. Can you do that? After Clarissa— Clarissa betrayed me, Harry said quietly. You've only ever tried to survive in a world stacked against you. There's a difference. His eyes searched hers. The question is, can you trust me, after the way I've treated you? Michelle thought of the cold carriage ride, the separate chambers, the formal distance, the weeks of feeling like a ghost in her own marriage. Then she thought of his hand at her back during the soiree. his protection in the library, his fierce defense tonight. "I can try," she whispered. "Then that's enough." Harry's lips brushed her forehead, tender and promising. "We'll learn together." Outside, the last carriage disappeared into the snowy darkness. Inside Winterset Hall, the Duke and Duchess stood wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by dying candles and the lingering scent of winter roses. For the first time since their marriage, neither of them felt alone, and in the East Wing, in Harry's study, a portrait remained turned to face the wall. But it no longer mattered, because the past was finally, truly, behind them. Lady Clarissa Montrose left London 3 days after the Christmas ball. The whispers followed her departure like shadows, tales of her desperate scheme, her forged letters, her failed attempt to destroy the new Duchess. Society, ever hungry for scandal, devoured the story with relish. Clarissa, once celebrated and feared, became a cautionary tale whispered behind fans and over tea. She fled to the continent, they said, Italy, perhaps, or France. Somewhere far from the judgment she had tried so hard to inflict on another. Michelle heard the news while reviewing household accounts in the morning room, the same room where Clarissa had once circled like a predator. Now it felt different, lighter. The winter sun streamed through windows no longer shadowed by threat. "Good riddance," Mrs. Henshaw muttered, setting down the morning correspondence. Then, catching herself, she added hastily, "Forgive me, Your Grace. That was improper." Michelle looked up from the ledgers, a small smile playing at her lips. "But not untrue." The housekeeper's expression softened, genuine warmth replacing the cautious formality of weeks past. "If I may say so, Your Grace, the household is happier since the ball. His Grace seems—" She searched for the right word. "Present." Michelle understood exactly what she meant. Harry was different now. The cold distance had thawed into something warmer, more real. He sought her out, not out of obligation, but desire. They took breakfast together. He asked her opinions on estate matters. In the evenings, they sat by the fire in the library, reading or talking or simply existing in comfortable silence. The walls between them had finally, truly begun to crumble. "Mrs. Henshaw," Michelle said thoughtfully, "I'd like to host a charity dinner next month for families affected by the harsh winter. Nothing extravagant, something meaningful." The housekeeper's eyes widened with approval. "That's a wonderful idea, Your Grace. I'll begin preparations immediately." After she left, Michelle returned to the accounts, but her mind wandered. She thought of the woman she'd been weeks ago, terrified, isolated, convinced her beauty was both her only asset and her greatest curse. That woman felt like a stranger now. She had survived society's cruelty. She had endured Clarissa's trap, and she had discovered something unexpected, her own strength. Beauty hadn't saved her. Grace under pressure had, intelligence had. The quiet resilience she'd cultivated through years of being underestimated. Harry had seen it, and now, finally, she saw it too. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of violet and gold, Michelle stood before her chamber window watching fresh snow begin to fall. Her golden gown from the ball hung nearby, cleaned, pressed, preserved. She hadn't been able to put it away. It represented too much. The night everything changed. A knock sounded at her door. "Come in." Harry entered, still in his riding clothes, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. His eyes found hers immediately, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, crossing the room to stand beside her at the window. About the night we signed the marriage contract." His hand found hers, warm and steady. "Do you remember what I said? 'Let us conclude this business,'" Michelle quoted softly. "I was a fool." Harry turned her to face him, his winter blue eyes intense. "This was never business, Michelle. even when I pretended it was, even when I built walls and kept you at a distance. Some part of me knew. Knew what? That you were dangerous. A smile tugged at his lips. Not because you were beautiful. Because you were real, honest, everything Clarissa pretended to be but never was. His hands framed her face. I was terrified of that. Michelle's heart hammered. And now? Now I'm more terrified of losing it. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. Losing you. Harry, I'm in love with you, Michelle. The words came rough, honest, like something he'd been holding back too long. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first night when you stood in your father's study, terrified but determined. Maybe when I caught you crying but you refused to break. Maybe at the ball when you stood in front of 300 people ready to tear you apart and you didn't run. He pulled her closer. But I know I can't pretend anymore. I don't want a marriage of convenience. I want you. Tears spilled down Michelle's cheeks. Joyful, overwhelming, real. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for weeks. I was just too afraid to admit it. Harry's expression transformed, the careful control melting into something open and vulnerable and achingly tender. Then let's stop being afraid. He took her hand and led her from the chamber, through the corridors of Winterset Hall, until they stood at the top of the grand staircase, the same staircase where she'd first descended as his bride, terrified and alone. Now she stood beside him, his hand warm in hers, snow drifting past the tall windows like silent witnesses. Do you remember this moment? Harry asked softly. The night we arrived? You asked me to be convincing, Michelle said. You said we had to maintain appearances. I was wrong. He turned to face her, both hands clasping hers now. This time, his voice dropped, intimate and certain. This time, not for appearances. And there, at the top of the staircase where their marriage had begun as a cold transaction, Harry Rodriguez kissed his wife. Not for society, not for reputation, not for show, for love. Michelle's arms wrapped around his neck, her fingers threading through his hair, and she kissed him back with everything she'd kept locked inside, all the loneliness, the hope, the desperate need to be seen, to be known, to be loved for more than just her face. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and smiling, snow continued to fall beyond the windows. What happens now? Michelle asked, echoing the question she'd posed on the night of the ball. Harry's smile was genuine, warm, and entirely hers. Now we live, truly live. No more pretending, no more walls, no more fear. Just us? Just us. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. A duke who was too broken to trust, and a woman beautiful enough to make him try. Michelle laughed, bright and real. That's not why you love me. No, Harry agreed, his eyes soft. I love you because you're brilliant and brave and stubborn and kind. The beauty is just, he smiled, a lovely bonus. As they descended the staircase together, hand in hand, Michelle glanced back at the portrait-lined walls of Winterset Hall. The stern-faced ancestors seemed less judgmental now, less cold. This house had been a prison, a museum, a place of shadows and careful distance. But now, with Harry's hand in hers, with love transforming what had been merely transactional, it felt like something else entirely. Home. Outside, the snow fell softly over the grounds of Winterset Hall, blanketing everything in quiet promise. Inside, the Duke and Duchess stood together in the candlelit warmth, no longer strangers bound by contract, but partners bound by choice. Their marriage had been forged in desperation, built on beauty, and nearly destroyed by cruelty. But it had survived. And now, finally, it was becoming something neither of them had dared to hope for. Real. True. Worth fighting for. A love story written not in forged letters, but in moments of vulnerability, trust rebuilt, and two wounded hearts learning to beat as one. Thank you, Michelle whispered against Harry's shoulder as they stood wrapped in each other's arms. For what? For seeing me, the real me. Harry pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his expression tender and absolute. How could I not? You're impossible to miss. And there, in the house that had once felt like winter itself, spring finally began to bloom. Their marriage, born of beauty and desperation, had been tested by scandal and nearly destroyed by jealousy. But through it all, through public humiliation and private pain, they had discovered something society could never understand. That true love isn't built on appearances, but on the courage to be vulnerable, to trust again, and to see beyond the surface to the soul beneath. The Duke's kiss had redeemed her, but Michelle's strength had saved them both. Dear listeners, thank you for staying with us until the end. If this story moved you, please subscribe, like, comment, and share it with someone close to you. Your support inspires us to keep creating stories filled with love, healing, and unforgettable twists.